Cool. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the talk on building a database security program. My name is Matt Presson. Oh, well, let's just kill the slide. So, my name is Matt Presson. I'm a senior information security analyst for a large insurance brokerage organization based out of the UK. On a day-to-day basis, I'm doing mostly application security stuff, so pen tests, code reviews, talking to developers, talking to managers, writing reports, just all the general stuff that people do for an application security program. But lately, what I've been trying to focus on is building a database security program and trying to change and better the security posture for my company. So what I'm going to talk about today is to try to tell you why database security is so important and why each of you need to go back to your own organizations and develop a database security program. I'm also going to go over the process of developing a program. So what does it mean? What is it composed of? But also I'm going to tell you what to watch out for, because there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of paths that you can take that will basically take you down the wrong way. It'll stall your program. It will make everything run very slowly. And really, it increases your chances of failure. So we're going to try to avoid that and make everything great for you so it's all streamlined. One thing I'm not going to be able to give you, though, today is a blueprint. I can't tell you at the end of the day what your program is going to look like. Instead, I'm going to focus on the path and the process because, as you'll see in a minute, this program is designed to address the concerns and issues that your organization is having. Because every one of our organizations have a different risk profile, they have different concerns, they have different issues. The end product will be different, but the process of getting there is pretty much the same. So, why should you care about database security? The answer to that question is pretty simple. It's because we are all failing. What I mean by that is we as information security professionals, when it comes to doing our basic, most important job, taking the intellectual property, the processes that our organizations use to have our competitive advantage, to operate every day, all of that sensitive data, we're failing to protect it. You can see this when you look at the news and you just see breach after breach after breach. Nobody's protecting the data. If you think about it, when you're trying to say, well, how does that relate to a database security program? Well, look at the data that you're touching. The HR data, your CRM systems, ERP, your Salesforce integration, all of the custom web applications that you've written to interface with your customers and your business partners. All of that data is somewhere, and I'm going to bet you money that that somewhere is a database. When you look at that, and then you take information from, say, the Verizon data breach report, or Mandiant's reports, or stuff from White Hat Security, what you'll notice is that the style of attack is changing. It's not about popping root shells anymore. It's not necessarily about getting malware on a system. Both of those are just now a means to an end. If you ask any good pen tester or you ask any good attacker, they will tell you shell is just the first step. It's all about the data. If I'm going to make money for my family and to take care of myself, I can't go to your competitors and say, hey, I got a shell on his box. What are you willing to give me for it? They're not going to give me anything for it. But if I go and say, here's their critical business data, here's their critical business processes, here's how they are beating you, they're willing to buy that. When you look at that and you look at how people are getting the data, what you'll notice is they're not focusing on the networks. They're coming through the applications that you're providing. We're talking layer 7. The problem is that the controls that we have are not addressing this. I got a few of them listed up top. Firewalls. Okay. That's layer 2. What ports am I allowed to come in on? What servers am I allowed to hit? I'm coming in through your web applications. You opened 80 and 443 to me. Great, I have just bypassed all of your firewalls with a browser. IDS and IPS, again, they're looking for different network style attacks. I'm not fragmenting packets. I'm not, putting odd flags on. I'm not, doing different UDP style attacks. I'm talking straight HTTP, valid stuff that's going to pass right past your IDS and IPS, and you're not going to know I'm there. AV HIDs and HIPs. I'm not dropping malware on your boxes. I'm not executing weird processes and trying to do privilege escalation. All I'm trying to do is sit there and tell the backend database through this Sql injection vulnerability, don't give me the data that you want, give me the data that I want. And then again, lastly, full disk encryption. Full disk encryption is going to do you absolutely no good against an application level attack. It will if I'm inside your data center ripping drives out of your servers, but that's not going on today. As a result, nobody's really watching the data, and because of that, we're still getting breached. Here's quite a few headlines that really illustrate it. I mean, Heartland, Global Payments, TJX, the multiple Sony attacks that happened is like one every day for a month. LinkedIn. All of these companies had the controls that I just mentioned. They had firewalls, they had a NOC, they were monitoring all this stuff. The problem is they weren't watching what people were actually going after. They weren't watching who was accessing their data. LinkedIn is a really good example of this. For those that are not aware, a couple of months ago, LinkedIn lost 6.5 million user password hashes. There were unsalted SHA-1 hashes. They didn't know about it until they wound up on Pastebin. They could not answer the critical questions that they needed to answer. Who's accessing my data? What data are they accessing? How much are they accessing? How many requests is this user making, in this application feature? Is that normal? Where's the data going once it's being accessed? The funny part about that is, and use funny in a loose term here, is that people on Twitter who were using tools such as LastPass, 1Password, KeyPass, all these different password managers, they were able to validate the same day that it was LinkedIn's data. They go into the tool, pull out their password, do an unsalted SHA-1 hash. If the hash is in the breach data, hey, congratulations, it belongs to LinkedIn. It took LinkedIn days to validate that it was actually their data. In today's world where, where you have the tools necessary to monitor what people are going after, it's really sad that, such a company that, we all probably trust because we all probably have LinkedIn accounts. They can't tell when they're breached or who's accessing their data until they wind up on Pastebin. The cool thing, though, is that there is a solution to this, and that is actually monitor the data. Monitor where it sits most of the time, and you can do that through a database security program. So at a high level, a database security program is just like any other program you've put together for your organization. It can be broken down into 3 phases where you plan what you want to do, you go do it, and then you go do some type of ongoing maintenance to make sure that things haven't changed, things are still secure, and everything like that. So because it's just like every other program, it all starts out in the planning phase. When you're sitting there figuring out and you're first developing a database security program, the first thing you need to do and what you're trying to do is determine the roadmap. Determine exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish in your company. Now, most of us would go sit back down at our desk or go sit in our office and we would start writing down all the controls and all the tools and everything we want to put in place as security people. That's wrong. Don't do that. What you instead need to do is you need to become a strategic business partner in your organization. You do that by figuring out who your stakeholders are. Your stakeholders in your organization are going to be those people that have a vested interest in keeping your data safe. These are the people who use that critical business data, all that intellectual property on a day-to-day basis so that your company makes money and is profitable. These are also the people who realize that not only does the data have to be available, but if they're going to use it, it has to be correct, and that only the people who need to be able to see it can see it. So right there, you have your CIA triad. You have your confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The key thing to note here is that these people are not really in your information security organization. Your CISO is going to be a good stakeholder. You need their support. But your best stakeholders, the people who are using the data, are actually going to be your business users, the heads of your business processes, because they're actually the ones making you money. Another good stakeholder to get in your organization is compliance and audit. They're the ones who go on a day-to-day basis and make sure that all the departments in your organization are adhering to your own internal standards, your own internal processes, but they also interface with all your industry regulators. So if you deal with PCI or HIPAA or SOX, there are certain things you need to address there. Go talk with compliance. They can help you form the standards and the policies and put in place what you need and what's required by your organizations so that you can win, so that you can detect when somebody's coming into your network, when somebody's stealing your data, and you can do it in near real time. Another good stakeholder is your application support managers. These are the people that when the breach happens, they're going to get asked those tough questions. Who got the data? How much did they get? How did they get it? Where did they go? What are we going to do about it? If you as a security professional can go and engage with your application support managers, show them and demonstrate to them that you can help them detect all of these things going on in near real time, help them stop the breach either before it happens or as it's happening and minimize the overall damage to your company, that's a win. They can also go back to those critical business leaders and, be support for you when you need it. The point here is, determine what the business concerns are. What issues do they have? That's what we should be doing as security professionals and offering solutions for. Don't just sit there and implement tools to implement tools. If you can't answer the question, why are we doing this? Then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. So focus on what the business needs are, focus on how you can address those, and make that the goal and the focus areas for your database security program. After you figure out your goals, it's time to look at what standards and policies you have in place. Look at the issues, look at how you're currently addressing them. Maybe you don't have a way to ensure a standard build or a secure build for all of your database servers or your application servers or your web servers, or maybe it's even your endpoint desktop and laptop systems. Okay, maybe you need to work on your build configurations. Go talk to the vendors, see what they're doing. Maybe you're doing password audits and you're finding SA as the password credentials for all your critical SQL Server databases. Go work on your password complexity. Access control and permissions management. How do I get access to your database? If your app doesn't support this functionality, but I need to go run a report for my boss every day or every week, how do I request access? Once I get that access, how do you determine what permissions I need on that database? The last bit of planning is data classification. This is very, very key. Once you start looking at all these systems, one thing you'll quickly realize is that each of them has a different business value. You probably care more about your $10 million SAP implementation than you do the cafeteria lunch menu app. Because of that, you're going to want to put different types of controls, different levels of controls in place for those two different apps. Here's where data classification comes in. One thing with data classification, though, is to do it right, you don't necessarily want to focus on the security metadata that we generally do. The secret, the top secret, the confidential, the private, public, all the stuff that we generally determine as data classification. The right way to do it is don't go at it from a security viewpoint. Figure out the different types of data that are critical to your system. Be able to tell the difference between HR data and just an org chart. Be able to tell the difference between pre-release financial information and the earnings report that you released last quarter. Once you figure out that type of information, where that data exists, and the types of controls that you have to put around it for regulatory, and the types of controls that you want to put around it for actual protection, Then group those controls and then apply your security meta tags. Because another thing is you have to keep it simple too, and realize that it's not going to be the security team that's going to classify all of your data. Nobody here can go back to their organization and classify every piece of data that they have. It's just not possible. New data is being created all the time, data is being deleted. The real job of classification is going to be those business leaders, those business end users who use it every day to make your company money. If they can't understand what type of data it is, and therefore what types of controls need to be put around it, your data classification is going to fail. You're not going to get the right types of controls around it, and then you're just going to be chasing your tail. So keep it simple, focus on it from a business perspective, and then apply the security controls. After you're really done with planning, it's actually time to start doing stuff. It's actually time to start going in there, touching the servers, changing the security state, and hopefully making these systems more resilient to attack and more secure than they currently are. To do this, it's a simple process. It's just a loop. Go figure out the servers you want to focus on, secure access to them, secure their infrastructure, and set up some monitoring so that you're knowing what's going on. Really simple, and it all starts out with discovery and assessing. When you're trying to figure out what you want to work on first, the key is to focus at the application layer. I know we're talking about databases, but at this point we want to focus on the applications, and that's for a simple reason. The business people that use this data do not think at a database layer. They could care less about the database layer. To them, it's just an anomalous blob. What they do know is they know the processes that they use, they know the applications that they interact with every day, and they know what has to be up and running for them to do their job. So what you want to do is you want to go and engage the business and figure out what are these critical systems, these critical applications that my organization needs to run every day. A good place to start with that is your BCDR plan. It's what BCDR is. Hey, something really bad has happened, the data center's down, what applications and systems do we have to have up first to get business back up and running so we can make a profit? If those are on your BCDR plan and those are the ones that are going to be brought up first, I'm going to bet you those are the ones that probably contain most of the data that is most critical to your business. It might not necessarily be the most sensitive data. It may not be your HR system, but it's the most critical to the business, and that's really what we're here to focus on. So get that list of critical systems. Then go talk to your DBAs. Go talk to your platforms teams. Go talk to those application support managers that are your stakeholders. Say, hey, I've got this list of apps. What databases back end these apps? At that point, you have the list of databases that you're going to want to then focus on and to start securing. When you first start coming across the databases, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can secure it. But one of the best ways to secure a system is to really secure who has access to it and what permissions they have. If everybody in your organization has DBA level privileges on your PeopleSoft database and something happens, who do you go talk to? You got to go talk to everybody. If 3 people in your organization have DBA level privileges and only 2 others have the ability to run custom reports, you have much less work to do. You have much less investigation. Secure the access to your databases and control what permissions the users get. Minimize the number of accounts that you have. Keep those to a minimum. Another good thing about this is that you're reducing the attack surface. If I, as an attacker, get access to your organization and everybody has access, I have a multitude of accounts to try to gain access to that data with. If I have 4 accounts I can choose from, not only do I have to focus on those, but you're also more likely to catch me in the meantime, because I'm probably going to lock out an account, I'm going to disconnect a user, or something bad is going to happen that's going to make you notice. That might not happen if everybody has access. While you're reducing the number of accounts, make sure that you specifically address the admin issue. If somebody's just running a report every day, why do they have DBA privileges? Could you get away with a stored procedure or a view? Could you go even a step further and completely remove their account, script something up in a database job, and just email them the results? If you don't need access, don't give it to them. If they need access, figure out the absolute minimum number of permissions that they need to have to do their job. It's all least privilege and basic stuff. But at the end of the day, if you do it right, your systems will be so much more secure and you will have to worry so much less about it. Another part of securing access is controlling where accounts come from. One of the quickest ways to determine if something funny is going on, and by funny I mean, are you getting breached? The quickest way to determine that is when your production application account is suddenly accessing the database at 2:30 in the morning on a Sunday from the user LAN segment. What's going on? Can you detect that? If you can't, you're not going to know. You need to be able to detect that stuff. A simple way to fix that is set up a terminal server, set up a Bastion host, go configure the Windows firewall or IP tables to say, hey, these are the only boxes that can access my database. You have your application server, your Bastion host, and maybe a couple of your DBA workstations because you want convenience for your DBAs. Fine. If it's anything that's not from there, maybe you should send an alert. The next part is securing the infrastructure. What you don't want to do here is to have this super uber secure database software and two people have access and they have the minimum passwords or the minimum permissions and super strong passwords, but your server is vulnerable to MSO 8067. Congratulations. I am system, I'm going to go in, I'm going to steal your data files, and I have your data. Secure the infrastructure. We're patching our laptops and our desktops every month. Why are we not patching our database servers? Yes, I know people go and say, well, it's a critical system, and if it goes down, we're going to have downtime, and that's bad, and all the blah, blah excuses. How many problems are you having with users not being able to use their laptops or their desktops when you run Microsoft Update every month? Probably not many. Why are you not doing the same on your databases, on your database servers? It's completely unexcusable. Patch your systems. A good example of this is also the Mysql authentication bypass vulnerability that came out recently. Basically, this was for Linux systems. It was compiled with a version of a libc library that I think used some type of random function. The problem was that this version of the libc library was broken. Randomly, in 1 out of every 1,024 requests, whether the evaluation of the function was true or false, the result came back true. What this allowed an attacker to do was basically write a simple script to connect to your MySQL server and go, give me access as root, give me access as root, give me access as root. You throw that in a for loop, and in somewhere around 1,024 requests, I'm in as root with no password. Patch your infrastructure and patch the database software itself. It's just like Java, it's just like Adobe. Patch your stuff. The last part is setting up monitoring. Do you know what your employees are doing? All those critical questions. Who's accessing the data? Where from? How much? We have to be able to answer those. And there's quite a few ways to do it. There's the built-in transaction logs. DBAs don't like to turn those on because they take up disk space. But if that's all you have, at least it's something. Go look. Go figure out what's happening. Go figure out what's normal for your application to do. Take all of that out. Whatever's left, go inspect and find out what it is. There are third-party tools that you can use. Personally, that's what my company does. We bought a third-party tool that actually resides as an agent on the machines. I can tell you who's accessing the database, what queries they're running, what parameters they're passing in, when they did it, how long they were there, all that type of stuff. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but it's an option. The last thing, at the end of the day, maybe you can't win the transaction log fight and you can't get funding for your tool. Implement some database triggers. Hey, every time somebody gets more than 1,000 rows or 100 records from the credit card table, send the DBA an email. Send the security team an email. Do something. Figure out what's going on in your databases, because that's the only way you're going to determine whether somebody's trying to steal your data or not. When you're setting up monitoring, what you're also going to want to do is have different levels of monitoring. This really comes from the regulatory side of things, where you really care about what your DBAs are doing. They have full access to everything. They can easily screw stuff up, but they can also easily steal all of the data without really being noticed. Monitor everything they're doing. For the person who's, running the report every Monday at 2 o'clock in the morning, okay, let's just make sure that they're logging in at the appropriate time and that they're not accessing the database at, 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday. A good thing to monitor, along those lines is activity outside of the norm. Maybe that report only returns 100 records on average, but now it's returning every record in the database. Did somebody modify the report script? Did somebody change the stored proc? Was that valid? Was it malicious? Is there a flaw? You don't know. But if you're not looking for it, you don't know that it's happening, and you can't make those decisions about what you want to do about it. So set up some monitoring and watch for specific events. I've already mentioned access outside of the normal activity period, but also watch for failed login attempts. Actually, both styles of failed login attempts. What I mean by that is, you have one username and you're going to try many passwords. That'll set off a lot of alarms because that's probably going to lock out a bunch of accounts. But what if I take a bunch of common passwords and try them against every username in your organization that I dumped from AD? I can do that in such a way that the requests come in a pattern that doesn't trip your account lockout, because it's taking me so long to cycle through all of the usernames that I never get 3 failed login attempts for that one user in, say, 10 minutes. Monitor for both. Both of them can be an easy pre-detection of something that's about to happen. Also, reports returning too much sensitive data. Kind of covered that. Did somebody modify the report? It generally is 100 records. Now it's returning everything. What's going on? Abnormally high numbers of requests and Sql injection attempts. If you're familiar with blind Sql injection, you'll know what I mean, but if you're not, basically the way blind Sql injection works in an app is it takes a given record in a given table in a given column, and it extracts data 1 character at a time. So if we take LinkedIn as an example, they had 6.5 million user password hashes, unsalted SHA-1, and they were hex encoded. Hex encoded SHA-1 value is 40 characters. So essentially what I have to do is use Boolean expressions to say, is the first character of the first record an A? Is it a B? Is it a C? Is it a D? Oh, it is. Okay. Move on to the second character. You take that style of Boolean operator, you multiply that times 40 characters, you multiply that times 6.5 million records. You throw that in a script. That is going to be a huge, huge amount of requests against your database. And I'm going to almost guarantee you, unless you have a really, really serious database, that is going to exceed your normal transaction count thresholds. There's going to be a spike on some type of monitoring. What's going on there? Somebody is a developer just testing a script that they accidentally pointed to production instead of a QA instance. Are you under attack? There's also a way to monitor for Sql injection attempts through the type of query that's being run. Go get your favorite SQL injection tools. Go get SQL Map. Go get SQL Barbecue. Go get SQL Power Injector. Go get Havij. Run these tools through an application proxy such as Burp or OWASP WebScarab or Zap. Look at the types of requests that these tools are sending. Look for patterns in those requests, because one thing I can guarantee you is that none of your DBAs and none of your developers are writing SQL that looks like the SQL that these tools are sending into your applications, especially if it's a blind SQL. So if you take those patterns and you set up your monitoring to look for those patterns, you will know within the first request whether somebody is trying to attack you or not. Now, whether the attack is successful, that's a completely different thing. But at least you can tell at that point, this user, this database user, is coming from this system, and they're trying something against this application. What are you going to do to stop it? Are you going to shut the database down, start up your IR process, whatever? You've been notified, now go decide what you need to do. And really, I mean, that's the big part of doing your database security program in the implementation phase. You break off that first manageable chunk of apps, you go through the process. Everybody who needs access actually has it. They have the minimum permissions, we're fully patched, our database is up to date, and I have monitoring so I can tell what's going on. It's now time to grab that next set of applications, go figure out what databases they are, or what databases support them, and start all over again. Keep doing that till you get through that list. When you're done, you can really, really be confident that you have really reduced the attack surface and the ability for your organization to lose its most critical data. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that if you do this, you will never be hacked, that you will never be breached, that your data won't end up on Pastebin. What I can tell you, though, is that if you set this up right and you've done everything that you can possibly do, and you're actually paying attention to the monitoring that you set up, you'll be able to tell when that attack starts, and you may not lose as much data as you would if you didn't know it was going on. After implementation comes the ongoing maintenance phase, the part that everybody hates because it's, boring. Really, though, I mean, it's quite simple. Go back, check on those systems that you've already secured. Has anything changed? Have any new accounts been added? Have permissions changed? Is the monitoring working? Are you detecting what you need to do? Go back and work with your DBAs. You don't have to do all of this work yourself. Your DBAs and your compliance departments, they're in these systems anyway. If you've developed your standards and policies in a way that they can check them, you can go on and secure other systems, and they can come in and tell you, hey, there was 14 new accounts added to the PeopleSoft database. We found some permissions issues. Maybe you need to go talk to that group again. Go work. Leverage your resources. You don't have to do everything yourself. Last part is to keep your documentation current. If you started out this project and you develop your standards and everything was on SQL Server 2005, but now you're deploying 2008 R2, or you're moving on to SQL Server 2012, the same things that apply for SQL 2005 are not going to apply to 2008 and 2012. You're going to be making the wrong recommendations. You're going to be going to these platforms teams who know their systems, and they're going to look at you like you're an idiot. Stay current, stay up to date, go review what the vendor has to say. Part of your documentation and all these policies that you're developing, you don't have to come up with them all on your own. Go look at what's out there. Go see what the vendor published. Go look at different standards published by organizations like SANS, NIST, different government agencies. I know the NSA publishes stuff on how to secure different types of Windows and Linux systems. Go review what they have. See what applies to your organization and what really makes sense in your business processes. Maybe, you're Boeing and you're developing stuff for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. Okay, we need two-factor authentication. You're changing your password every 15 days. It has to be 12 characters long and completely random. I'm an insurance brokerage company. I'm not being attacked necessarily by the same type of people that are going after Boeing and Lockheed Martin. So maybe I can relax my standards a little bit. What applies to your organization? Tailor it to your organization and what makes sense. But remember, again, you don't have to do it all on your own. There are resources out there. Utilize them. So really, basically this is a long-winded talk to basically say one thing. We have got to protect our data. If we do not know who's accessing it and where they're accessing it from, what type of data they're accessing and how much, where that data is going once they get it, we can't protect it. That's what people are after now. They're not after the root shells and everything. They're after your data because that's what's going to make them money. That's what's going to help them bring your organization down. Engage with the business. Be a business partner. Do not be the stereotypical security person who goes in there and tells the business how they need to run it. They know how to run the business. Your business is profitable, hopefully. They know the business processes. They know what they have to do. Go figure out how you can enable them to do that. Be a partner. Help them, be innovative. Help them to do risky things that they need to do as a business in a secure manner. Address their issues. Don't sit down and figure out the things that you want to implement as a security guy just for security's sake. And, secure your most critical systems first. If you have your HR and your SAP and your ERP and all of this, do that before you do the cafeteria lunch menu app or the departmental birthday application. And don't forget about the infrastructure. Like I said, we're patching end user systems that they rely on every day to do their jobs. Why are we not doing the same thing for our production systems? Monitor, monitor, monitor. If you don't know what's going on, you cannot do anything about it. And lastly, stay current. If you're not up to date on what options you have, go figure out what they are. See if they apply and implement them. And really, that's all I have. So, does anybody have any questions? Sure. That's actually a great question. What the question was this gentleman is a vendor who has a product that includes a database as part of the product. What can he do as a vendor to help, his clients and his customers secure their data? The first thing to do is, really don't run your app as administrator. You don't need, your app should not require DBA privileges. The simplest way to do that is to create two database accounts. So when I'm first installing your app, obviously you have to initialize the schema, you have to create the tables, views, stored procs, all the stuff to support the app. That needs to be administrator. I mean, that's just the fact of life. Have that account, create that stuff, but have a second, completely separate database account that your application uses to access that data. Generally, your app is not going to need to be able to modify the views or stored procs or the table structure. Don't give it that permission. Minimize the permissions that the app has to what it needs. Say you have a lookup table of the 50 US states. You're probably not going to be, updating or deleting anything from that table. In best case scenario, just give select on that table. So really focus on the permissions that your application needs to function. Tie those permissions down to a specific app, for a specific account for that app that doesn't have everything that it doesn't need. And at that point, you're good. Anyone else? Yes. Good question. The question was, let's say you have a web service that actually interacts with multiple databases. Everything I've kind of talked about here is everything's kind of in one database and you're going to monitor the stew out of that. But his example is, well, what if that data is spread across multiple databases? How do you do monitoring like that? Personally, I have no experience with that. Everything that I have is this one app has maybe this one database or maybe two databases, and we only really care about one, so let's monitor that. I'm sure some of the vendor tools could possibly help you with that, but I can't speak to that from personal experience. Maybe you could do some aggregation on your own. I know personally the tool that we use, there's an agent that sits on the box that it hooks certain kernel drivers and basically watches everything that goes across the network on a certain port for a certain database. Then that agent sends all of that data back to a collector. Then you can go in and you can analyze that data and you can run different reports based on what you're looking for, who's accessed it, failed logins, what have you. The best I could think would be writing a custom report in the tool that you've implemented to kind of look at the different databases and, group data from that group of servers. I don't know if that actually addresses or answers your question any, but that's about the best I can do. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Database encryption, wow. We personally don't use database encryption. I've seen the pros and the cons of it where, you have a cluster and things necessarily don't work quite right. You obviously, once you're doing encryption, how do I search that data? But really, yeah, I generally delegate encryption to the application level, is what I've always done, and then had key management at that level. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Absolutely isolate your critical databases. His question was, what about database firewalls, segregation, different VLANs? Absolutely. Especially if you're under PCI, that's kind of like a requirement. Have all your sensitive data in one VLAN, or at least segregated, I should say. But yes, the tool that we use has database firewall capabilities. We personally haven't implemented it because we know the second we turn that on and an app starts to fail because we've seen something suspicious, we're going to get reamed. You're breaking the business process. You're not enabling me to do what I need. But, as far as monitoring, and the firewalling, that's what that agent is doing. It's sitting there and it's acting kind of like a firewall, but it's, in a fail open. So it is purely reactionary. But you could, in a proper network setup, put a real firewall, put a checkpoint in front of all of it and only allow your application server VLAN to come in on specific ports to, your critical database VLAN or network segment. Anyone else? Awesome. Well, I do have, a bunch of resources here for your standards and policies. Slides are on SlideShare, so, feel free to go out there and look and download and, go learn some stuff. And if you have any questions, I'll be over here at the end. I have email and I'm on Twitter, Matt_Presson, Presson. So you can do that, or email Presson, Pressonma @gmail.com. So, thanks so much.